So, this is Motzei Shabbat and Motzei Yom Tov, Chag HaShavuot, 5775. I would like to share with you a couple of things that made an impression upon me, a lasting impression, I hope, over the course of Shavuot. This morning, Rabbi Krohn at the Young Israel Teaneck shared the following story on the occasion of, he mentioned that it's the conclusion of Masechet Ketubot in the Daf Yomi cycle. Daf Yomi is learning one page of Gemara Talmud every day. And when was it started? It started in the 1920s by Rav Meir Shapiro, the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva Chachmei Lublin. And he had this idea that the whole Jewish people should be learning the same thing. And wherever you would go, you could always join in the learning of the Jewish people. And that year he introduced this at the Agudas Yisrael convention, and it was picked up, and that Rosh Hashanah it began. We a couple of years ago we were at the Meadowlands Stadium with 90,000 people there, as well as tens of thousands of people elsewhere, and in Israel, really all over the world. We had groups joining in to celebrate the conclusion of the seventh cycle, I think it was, right? So where did Rabbi Meir Shapiro get this idea? Where did he get it? So Rav Pesach Krohn suggests from the following incident that made a very big impression on Rav Meir Shapiro when he was a little boy. His mother, Rav Meir Shapiro's mother, arranged that he should have a private teacher who would learn with him every day. And that went on for quite some time. And then they moved to the other side of town, and it was too far a distance for his Malamed, his teacher, to be there on a regular basis. So she terminated that relationship and engaged a new Malamed for her son, and arranged that the day they would move in, he would be there to study with little Meir. The day came, they moved in, and they're waiting, and the Malamed didn't show up. Turns out he thought it was the next day. He was confused. But Mrs. Shapiro started to cry when it became clear that the day had ended and the new teacher didn't show up. She sat down and she cried. And little Meir Shapiro came to us, "Mommy, why are you crying? You missed the day of learning." So he said, "I'll learn tomorrow." She said, "A day of learning missed can never be made up." A day of learning missed can never be made up. And from that incident, how many pages of Talmud have been studied by how many Jews? The power of that incident. That made a very big impression on me. And in the context of his drasha today, Rabbi Krohn was emphasizing how important the parent's example is for the children. This afternoon, we were privileged to hear from Rabbi Menachem Liebtag, also at the Young Israel, visiting, and he asked the question, what was the most important thing that happened at Mount Sinai when we, quote-unquote, received the Torah, the revelation at Sinai? What was the most important thing that happened there? What would you say? So we got the Torah, right? He said, like you say in Dayenu, Ilo Kervanu Lifnei Har Sinai V'lo Natan Lanu Et HaTorah. If God had brought us close to at Har Sinai and not given us the Torah, dayenu, that would be enough to give thanks for. What does that mean? God brought us close. V'keraftanu malkeinu. You brought us close to you. You chose us as your nation. Until that time, God was represented by individuals. Like you had even pagan gods would be represented by, like Yitro was a Kohen Midyan, and Yosef's father-in-law was Kohen On. You had also a Kohen to the real God, who was the Kohen Le'el Elyon. That was Melchizedek, was a Kohen to the real God. That was before Abraham came on the scene. And you had Abraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov, and God is represented by individuals. The new idea that was introduced at Har Sinai, that God was now going to be represented by a nation. Individuals can perish, but a nation can be eternal. But how will a nation be eternal? By as God points out, this is the quality of Avram Avinu, that he will teach his children. And point out a very interesting thing. What's the first mitzvah in the Torah? So, pru urvu, be fruitful and multiply. And yet, that God addresses that to the entire creation and to all human beings, and yet it's not one of the 7 mitzvot that applied to the Gentiles, to the descendants of Noah. Why not? Because to the descendants of Noah, be fruitful and multiply is a blessing. It's a blessing. You'll be fruitful and you'll multiply. But to the Jewish people, it's one of the 613 mitzvot. The first one listed in the Torah. Why? Because if you're people and you and you're alive, it's a blessing to have children. But if you're a nation that has to be eternal in order to pass on the God idea to the world, then you have to have children. Because you have to pass on that Masorah, to pass on that transmitted tradition, that message, that mission, that teaching. That's what God chose us for, and that's why it's a mitzvah. And the only way to keep that alive for all generations, not just 1 or 2 generations where residual influence can last, the only way is by creating a vibrant Jewish life that is infused with Torah study. That's the fire that keeps everything going. And he also emphasized the importance of personal example. These 2 things go hand in hand: Torah study and personal example. Someone who studies Torah and doesn't present a personal example that bespeaks the Torah, that's a in the extreme, that's a hypocrite. But it's certainly human failing. It can lead to Chil Hashem, because it desecrates the very purpose of what we're chosen for. But personal example that is not fueled by the renewed Torah learning eventually fizzles out. And so, like everybody knows that Jews value education, right? And the Jews, even Jews who are not religious, value non-religious education. But how long does that value last? So the Chafetz Chaim said, like in the laws of Shabbos, you have the idea there's a vessel that's on the fire. Then there's, if you pour let's say the water out from the kettle into a cup, that's a kli sheni, that's a second vessel. And a second vessel doesn't cook anymore, but it's very hot. And a third vessel, already you turn the second vessel into a third vessel, it's still warm, but it's not going to do very much really for you. And so if you don't keep getting, and because on Shabbos you can't put it back on the fire, but if you don't, if when you can, you want that to be hot, you have to put it back on the fire. For a Jew to be hot, there's got to be Torah learning. That's the fire. That affects not only the individual, but the community and the nation as a whole. Hashem should bless us that we should cherish every day of learning and put it into the context of our mission to pass on the God idea to the next generation and to the world, and that we should be blessed to know the Torah that God wants us to receive and to live it with a sterling personal example. Shavuot Tov.